Hello everybody, this is Mithril Zenith and welcome to Office Hours, the show where we follow up from Unit Design 101 to answer questions from commenters, talk about things that didn't make it into the video, and stuff like that. You know the drill at this point, let's get into it. Today I wanted to talk about dancers, the variety of roles that they can play, some of my personal thoughts and feelings and how some of those got edited out of the video, and how they were initially in the script and got edited out, because I came around to some different ideas as I was talking to people and editing and all that type of stuff. So without further ado, let's get into it. As you can see here, I have a technically not tier list of dancers. This is just them organized as in, okay, what can they do? What are their capabilities? At least my opinion on what their capabilities are. And yeah, 4X dancers are, obviously the genealogy dancers and the herons. They can dance for up to 4 people. Pretty good. Maybe combat can be useful dancers are dancers whose combat abilities are more than just token weapon equipment, like they can actually do things with them. Azura can use the attack stance to help out in attacks even when she's using her turn to dance, which is nice. Olivia can reclass into Pegasus Knight and get Gale Force, which then allows her to go back to Dancer, attack, and then dance, which is interesting. Not necessarily super useful, but does mean that her combat can provide a benefit in addition to her dance, because she can like bounce off an enemy to get to a farther away unit, stuff like that. You can always do all the pair up stuff. She can also then pass down Gale Force to Inigo as one of the very few male units who would be able to get it. Some fun stuff with that. And Sothis is here to represent any of the 3 houses units that you can make a dancer, because, well, any of them have the capability of becoming a dancer. Any of them also have the capability of becoming a pretty good combat unit. And for some of them, as some of the comments have talked about, getting Sword Avoid from Dancer can be a viable strategy. I'm not sure how viable it is on high difficulties and whatnot. I haven't necessarily played too much into the 3 houses meta, but people do enjoy getting Sword Avoid. That's a fun opportunity to do, and then thus making a dancer that has some combat utility, has magic access. So you have people mentioned bolting or meteor dancers. Hilda and Hanneman can get bolting. Dorothea can get meteor. I don't know if you can make Hanneman your dancer. I don't think you can, but just stuff like that. So to provide supports with the way the 3 houses did support with bonded attacks. You can do some interesting stuff, and their combat can definitely be useful. Dancers with other useful utility may or may not have some useful combat, but also have other stuff going for them. Like Seedal has Key Adept, which means that he can use combat to break enemy mages. If you really need to break them instead of just dancing, you can use Key Guard, I forget if that's the term for it, to protect an adjacent unit, assuming that he's not just going to be the one getting targeted, which does have some application. And then he can of course just dance, and he can also then use whatever emblem ability is applied to him as well. So if you were to put something like Corin on him, then he can generate, I'm trying to think, I think Dancer Field is generate ice is the Key Adept one. I should stop going through these on top of my memory when I don't remember. You have Ninian and Nils who have the rings, which some of them are much better than others. I think Ninis's Grace is very good for the arena because the buff is not counted into your stats when going in. Thor's Ire? No, Phila's Might, plus 10 attack, is also extremely good when it comes to that. It's plus 10 attack. A fast unit can do 20 more damage. A slow unit can still do 10 more damage. A high crit unit can triple that to 30 more damage. It lets units perform very well, particularly against high defense enemies. And for instance, it can find a lot of use against the Fire Dragon at the end of the game, where some units might be able to deal only single digit damage, suddenly they're dealing a lot more. I know that if you have like a max speed Lyn, you can do Phila's Might on her to actually double with the Sulcati and get some decent damage in. You might need to give her a body ring in order to do that. I don't remember, but I think you can do that. Anyway, plenty of options you can do with that. The other one, Set's Litany and Thor's Hire, are a lot worse, which is funny because they are, if not harder to get, at least later to get. Like, Niece's Grace you start with, Phila's Might is just in the desert pretty soon after. But then Set's Litany and Thor's Ire, you have to wait a fair number of other chapters and then get them from, like, I think one's on a chest and one's in a village or something. But it's plus 10 crit and plus 10 avoid, respectively, which plus 10 avoid is nothing compared to plus 10 defense resistance. It is by far the worst of the rings. Very seldom will 10 avoid put you where you're completely unhittable. It's like getting half of a forest. And then the plus 10 crit can be nice, can be useful, can definitely boost your crit to some funny numbers, but you're never going to reach FE6 Swordmaster levels, so, it's, not as good as just plus 10 damage. Because if you're already having a high crit, plus 10 damage is going to mean plus 30 on a crit. And then I put Leanne here because she's not a 4X dancer. She only dances for 2 units at a time, the ones that are on opposite sides of her. Which is interesting. I debated putting her into All I Do Is Dance, but technically she can use the other Guldraar, even though I think she's the lowest level of all the Herons, so she's the and she's in like the fewest chapters, so she's the hardest to get to the point where she knows them. And in the chapters where she is deployed, if she were somehow able to use those other Guldraar anyway, they would not be super useful. I mean, I guess in if somehow you got her to... I guess this is the thing, and this is why I don't like the Guldraar learning system, is that there's some genuine uses for the Galdir that are not dances, if only you got them earlier. For instance, the Galdir that instantly completely fills the Laguz gauge could be pretty useful in those Act 2 maps where you don't have enough Laguz stones or Olivine grass to keep everyone topped off at all times, or you don't want to have to spend the turn using that. You want to like actually attack with Mordecai or Lethe or something like that. But unfortunately that Galdir is only learned at level 30, and I think Leanne starts at level 6, so, and she's only available on, if I remember right, timed maps. So even if you wanted to just sit there and sing, you can't really. Yeah, it's tragic. It's like, I wish that those Galdir were available much, much earlier, because by the time you're unlocking them, you're already deep into the game. You're probably like in the tower. Like, okay, you might adjust biorhythm with Raisin once or twice in part 3, but by the time you're getting the increasing Laguz gauge, you're in the tower already, pretty much. Or especially if you manage to max out their level, you're definitely in the tower. And then it's a full heal and restore, which is nice, but by that point in time, you're using units that are one-rounding most things, and the only thing you're really afraid of is them getting killed themselves when trying to fight against one of Ashura's auras. So, hope that didn't come across the mic. Yeah. I'll come back to 4X dancers later. I just want to talk about dancers' other utility. Obligatory combat dancers, I guess this ended up just being Fina in both her iterations, where her combat is so bad. She can wield rapiers, she's the only unit who can do so, aside from Marth, which is fun, but not useful. Her stats are so far below Marth's that why would you not just want Marth using the rapier? You can give it to her, and she can maybe defend herself against 1 or 2 enemies, but no, it's not going to happen. You really are just using her to dance. And then you have the FE6 and FE8 dancers. All I Do Is Dance. That's all they do. They just do single target dances, have no other function outside of Tethys with the stone steal, like the glitch with multiple layered glitches, stealing enemy control to steal stone, and then using stone to level up dark magic. And then you get her as a unit that can then learn dark magic, but her strength, her attack stat is horribly low, and so she's not really dealing any damage. Plus dark magic and sacred stones is really bad, like really inaccurate. So you're kind of just stuck with a unit that, yes, you can go through all these hoops to make into something of a vaguely interesting, like, ooh, combat dancer, but realistically, no, she's just a dancer. And then you have the dancer-ish, which, if this website let me put in items, I would put the Anu staff, which, pro tip, someone in the comments reminded me that the Fire Emblem 3 version of the Anu staff refreshed all units globally, but it was limited to only 3 uses and I believe could not be hammered. So very fun, very powerful, very much worth playing FE3 Book 2, arguably just for that, just to be able to take like 2 or 3 turns, you know, take multiple turns in a row. That's fun. But yeah, I would put that there if this was at all possible. Faye, I talked about somewhat at length in the video, where she can learn the Anu spell, a version of it that only, you know, basically dances. It costs 24 HP, and she learns it at level 14 Saint, which means if you level her all the way up through Cleric to the point where she can promote, then promote her, then level her all the way up to... It's like she needs like 10 or 12 levels as Cleric, and then another 14 levels as Saint before she's able to learn the spell in the first place. And you are gaining some experience for healing and other spells, thankfully. If this was Gaiden, that would be like an impossible task. But she really is not going to be gaining a ton of experience as a Cleric, unless you're deliberately slowing down to do that. And then your reward is, okay, you have the Anu spell. You can use it once, and then she needs to be healed by your other Cleric in order to use it again. Your other Cleric being Silk, who is probably warping, or Tatiana, I guess, who can do other stuff too. But at that point, you're using probably 3 Clerics, which, yeah, in the overworld, you aren't limited by how many units you can use. But if you're going into a dungeon, like Thebes, for instance, if you've leveled the 14 Saint, you're probably in the end game. Thebes Labyrinth, you can only bring 10 units into. Any dungeon you can only bring 10 units into. So are you really bringing like 2 or even 3 Clerics to a dungeon? Maybe. But then I think with how much HP she loses, I'm pretty sure that counts as fatigue in dungeons. Don't quote me on that. I could be wrong. Maybe it's only damage you actually take from combat, but I feel like the HP loss from casting spells also adds to fatigue. So, I mean, which is a pretty minor thing in SOV anyway. You have endless, like almost endless food. It's interesting to be able to unlock the ability to dance from delving into a utility unit as like their late game benefit. And there were some people in the comment sections that really liked that idea. And I like that idea, but I don't like the way that it was implemented with how deep into Faye's tree it was, and the fact that she is a villager, not a base cleric, meaning that you have to choose to make her a cleric, which a lot of players just won't necessarily do if they don't already know what her spell list is like. I think we take for granted so often that players have knowledge of these things. It's just like the growth rates thing. People take advantage of growth, or people take for granted that we have knowledge of growth rates because someone data mined them and posted them on Serena's Forest or uploaded them onto a Discord bot and put them on the wiki and all that type of stuff. But for a lot of players, they don't have that knowledge. And so for, I would say, even more players, they don't have the knowledge of what Phase, Cleric, and especially Saint spell list are like. most players will never get a level 14 Saint Fae, so they will probably never even know the Anu spell existed. I know that I didn't know it existed until I saw like a YouTube video of someone using it and talking about it. So yeah, Dancer-ish, but really not for the main game for the vast majority of players, though I wish they would experiment with something similar to that. And then you have the Byleth Emblem, who is also Dancer-ish in the fact that his emblem attack is a 4-way dance with buffs based on what type of unit he's on. Just really good, really solid, and because of the other stats that he gives, he can genuinely be a pretty good combat option as well. I know one of my favorite things to do in my last run was I put him on Anna, who I had made a Mage Knight, mostly because I fell into the trap of, look, I like money, and he gives plus luck, and Anna uses luck to get money. But even then, it's like luck, speed, magic, I want to say, which are all very good for Mage Knight Anna. And then on turns where she doesn't want to delete one enemy, she can 4-way dance, which is fantastic. And you have a 4-way dance on a cavalry speed unit. I think that's a very interesting use of that 4-way dance potential, making it basically only once every 3 turns at most, because you only use it once per engage. And then after you wear out the engage, you have to stop on a tile to restore it, or you have to fight 6 times or something. I forget the exact calculation, but it's like 6 combats, or maybe it's fewer if you double or something, or you stop on one of those energy tiles and charge back up to use it again. And I like that pacing of, like, you can explode right out the gate and use it right away, get yourself at a big advantage, and then you have to kind of wait and recharge to do it again. And so you are planning around, when's my quad dance turn going to be, instead of every single turn setting up a quad dance. Which brings me to the quad dancers of the FE4 dancers and the herons that aren't named Leanne. Quad dancers are very powerful. They can dance for all adjacent units, or in FE4's case, if they are in a castle, they can dance inside the castle and refresh all units that are waiting inside the castle. This is not super common, but can be useful when you are, say, doing the first turn arena stuff and you have some staffers that want to heal units, or you have some units that go out and then come back in, for whatever reasons. You can just refresh all the units at the castle at once, which is kind of nice. One interesting restriction of the 4-way dancers, this is particularly notable in Genealogy, but also is notable in the case of Raphael for other reasons, because he has like broken wings and whatnot, is that the 4-way dancers have notably less mobility than, like, relative to the units around them, than the other dancers you have. Like, sure, other dancers are usually limited to unpromoted infantry movement, and I think that's what the 4-way dancers have as well. But in a game that so many people say is dominated by cavalry, dominated by road tiles and stuff like that, where you can very easily have your foot units fall very far behind your cavalry units, assuming you're in a position to safely move all of them their max movement, which a lot of times you actually can't, but semantics. Put this in this general front, just this general field of, your dancer will likely fall behind a lot of your other units. And so there are very few turns when you're going to be able to get a dedicated, deliberate quad dance that is exceedingly helpful. Oftentimes, your quad dance is mostly just going to be boosting the movement of a couple units by like maybe 1 or 2 points. Sometimes it can even be like basically no benefit. You're just dancing for the sake of dancing, because your dancer is falling behind, which is why a lot of people give their dancer the leg ring and the night ring. Leg ring to keep up with the rest of their army, and the night ring to be able to better position their dance closer to the front lines whilst also allowing their dancer to retreat back. Is it the by far best use of these two rings? Maybe, maybe not. If you're like me and in your Iron Man, one of the green units in Chapter 2 got themselves killed, you don't have the Night Ring, so you can't do that anyway. But I think it is interesting that you then have these opportunities with those four-way dancers, and then you have specific options with their combat with the FE4 dancers of, I believe it's the shield sword that Sylvia gets and can pass on to Lean, and then the barrier sword is the one that I'm spacing on her name. I am so sorry, but I do not remember her name. The substitute dancer. I believe it's the barrier sword, but I could be getting these mixed up, and it is the barrier sword that, or maybe they get both of them. I think Sylvia starts with the shield sword, but you can just put it off of her, and then either one of them starts with the barrier sword, just by default, or gets it at like a nearby village or with an interaction or something. I don't know. Either way, they have these swords. They boost their defense and resistance respectively, but you can also just sell them and give them to another unit, and those other units may or may not make better use of them. They're good swords. Again, your dancers aren't really fighting. They can help a little bit, but especially towards the end of the game, especially towards the end of Generation 2, and even the midpoint of Gen 2, enemies are so strong and so threatening, you're really not in a position most of the time to use your dancer, like to have your dancers see combat, even if their defenses are buffed with these defense increasing swords, because enemies are just so strong, they're going to one round you anyway. Which brings me to another point of like, am I fully against combat on dancers? When I was initially scripting this video, my answer would be absolutely yes. I don't like having dancers see combat. In fact, I will pull up the old version of the script. There was a whole section that I put in that I deliberately removed from the script because I thought it was too specific. Like I nailed down too much. It was too opinionated. I like to try to leave my own opinions out of Unit Design 101, at least in the sense of this is meant to be a straight up explanation of here's these unit types, here's how they function, here are some examples of ways in which they've been made to function differently, here are some ways that the unit type was strong, here are some ways the unit type was weak, here's some historical examples from other Fire Emblem games. I generally don't use hacks. Like I think I used one time as a reference just because it was like a perfect, like, hey, here's my point. I think that was like Kevin in the Armor Knight video for TLP. But generally I try to avoid using hacks because once you open those floodgates, they're wide open, and I do not have the actual experience with enough ROM hacks to give accurate information. But I try to stick to the main series games. I talk about how these unit types function. I talk about some small intricacies. Usually I try to find one or two little things that I think are fun quirks or ideas that you can kind of latch on to that really drive a certain point home, that maybe make people think about these units differently. I try not to get opinionated. I try not to push my own opinion and my own biases into Unit Design 101 videos. So here is the section that I cut from the previous script because upon rereading it, it felt way too biased. Okay. It was attached to the combat abilities section. Some dancers have combat abilities, albeit usually quite weak when compared to any other combat unit of roughly equivalent level. As the vast majority of dancers do not benefit much from levels, you don't get to dance better at higher levels, and your combat is still not your main focus. By the way, not dancing better at higher levels, I somehow completely forgot the special dance skill, which is kind of a big deal when they implemented it into Awakening and Fates, and I feel like it was in Three Houses as well, and Engage, but I don't remember. Anyway, technically you do dance better at higher levels because you unlock those special dance skills. But let's forget that point and move on. The ability to equip weapons and fight should be seen as a last resort, an augmentation of the weapon triangle in the rare instance they see combat, or a small touch of chip damage to perform if they somehow have no viable dance target. That is where it cut off in the video, but I continued for another sentence or two. The dev side danger of giving dancers combat options is that, since players love seeing their units level up, it incentivizes some players to go out of their way to feed kills to dancers, ultimately wasting the experience that other combat units need. Now, I will say that is not the most salacious take of opinion. That is not the most opinionated I've been. Arguably not even things that have even made it into scripts. But I did feel bad about imposing that onto the script because the dev side danger, it just felt very oddly worded. And while I still hold to that point of giving dancers combat when it's unnecessary and they don't benefit from it, just incentivizes some players to just train their dancers even though most dancers don't really benefit from leveling up, I still hold true to that opinion, because most dancers don't benefit from leveling up. But I feel like the way that I worded it was poor, or the way that it comes across was very either opinionated or potentially antagonistic. I also had a bit where I talked about Gale Force, but I did not. Looks like I may have removed that from the script entirely. Yes. Cool. But yeah, so that's something that I still believe, but I think I would phrase it better, and I agree with my... Obviously I agree with it. I made the decision, but I agree with my decision to not put it in the Unit Design 101, because I think it came off as too opinionated. I still agree that if your dancer doesn't really have much use for their combat, like for instance, Azura being able to use the pair-up system of Fates, or Olivia being able to utilize a combination of things like Gale Force into dancing, or stuff like that, or just the reclass system in general, then you're probably better off not giving your dancer combat, unless it's like, or rather the benefit that your dancer gains from combat is so small it might as well not exist. Like I said, the fact that Fina can equip a rapier is cool. It pretty much never actively helps you in any situation. Like, there's probably one person that can find one chapter where they equipped a rapier to attack once, and it was actually more beneficial than trying to dance another unit. It technically happens, but it's so rare, it's very unlikely. Because this also comes back to the fact that most dancers do not have growths designed to put them in combat situations. And so by treating them like combat units, giving them kills, making them not dance, and thus stealing experience is like a very overused phrase, but in this case, combat experience in most Fire Emblem games is limited. And so when you have a unit that can generate their own experience through dancing or even staff use, oftentimes the optimizer will want to, or the optimal play is to let them generate that experience and allow the combat experience to go to units who can only level up through combat. If you are giving a unit whose primary role is not combat and who has these other abilities to gain experience, combat experience, then you had better plan something plan a result wherein they use that experience well, wherein leveling them up is actually a benefit to you. And while I think that, sure, having some more hit points or more skill, like more speed or more luck, is not a bad thing for a unit, for any unit, I think that those levels are generally considered as wasted on dancers because they're paper anyway. They are going to die if they see combat anyway, and 1 or 2 more hit points is almost certainly not going to change that. The most I've ever actually done in boosting a dancer's like viable bulk is giving them a Seraph robe just so they don't get one shot by a siege tome on a map wherein I know there are lots of siege tomes. And that's basically the most that I do. And this comes into a discussion around developer intention versus player freedom, where I think there's a fine balance. I feel like I talked about this in a comment, but I don't remember if it was a comment on this video. Let me see if I can find it. If I did. Okay, yeah, I'm digging through my comments. I'm not seeing it, but I feel like I talked about it in a comment at some point in time. Oh yes, no, here it is. Maybe, actually no, it's not. But there is an interplay between like developer intention and player expression. And giving combat to a dancer solely for the sake of allowing the player to express themselves doesn't really sit right with me as an armchair developer. It doesn't really sit right with me because I feel like games that are more focused on what they want to be about are stronger because the developer has a little bit more of intention of, is it or is it, I'll ask the question, is it or is it not the developer's job to create a game that as the player plays it, the game itself shows the player what they should be focusing on, what they should be doing. It rewards the player for doing the good thing, punishes them for doing the not good thing. Is that or is that not good design? I would posit that it is, at least for most types of games. I've been playing a lot of Doom Eternal and Doom 2016, and they are very, very good at forcing you to get better at the game or dying. Is like, okay, sure, you can use the same weapon quite a bit in Doom 2016, and oftentimes players would get stuck in a position where, oh yeah, spamming the shotgun probably isn't the best way to do all fights, though it's perfectly viable to do a lot of fights with it. It might not be the best way. And so Eternal comes around and starts forcing players to switch up their weapons. Hey, shotgun's pretty useful. But what if you tried the rocket launcher? But what if you tried the plasma gun? Well, what if you tried the railgun? You know, give these other weapons a shot, and by basically forcing the player to do that through the very limited ammo system that Eternal had, the game imposed itself on the player saying, this is what the game is about. Do things our way, not the way that you want to do, but by doing them our way, you will actually improve and get better and find more of where the fun is, because the fun in that game comes from many sources. It comes from the brutality, it comes from the speed, and it also comes from mastery. And if you want to get better, you want to be able to switch weapons on the fly, you want to be able to find the right weapon in the right situation, you want to be able to get in, get out, do melee, do ranged, all those types of things. And I know I took this whole side tangent to talk about Doom, and I'm talking about Fire Emblem Dancers, which is, you know, super combat, non-combat at all. But I think that this could be one of those points that I feel like in giving a dancer combat, if you are not supporting those combat abilities in some other way, don't bother giving them combat at all. that is my own personal opinion, but I didn't feel that was right to put that specifically in the closer of the episode. So I instead watered it down, watered it down to be more minimal, to be like, if you don't see, like, if it doesn't fit your vision, you can remove combat from dancers because combat won't generally impact or something like that. It's like, okay, I feel like that is a bit more fair of a take, a bit less opinionated, because my true opinion is that, again, especially unless you are doing something where the combat itself is a useful utility actively, just having combat is not beneficial. And giving players things that are not giving players options is not inherently beneficial to the player. Because if those options are inherently worse than something else, why are you giving them the option in the first place? Honest question. I know a lot of people will say, oh, more options the better. Give me all the options. I want every single possibility so I can decide whatever I want to do. Sure, you can punch anything to death in a lot of RPGs. Skyrim, Final Fantasy, whatever. You don't even have to be a monk class to do it. You don't have to have any benefits. Vast majority of the time, you are better off picking up a weapon and actually fighting, or picking up a spell and actually fighting. Why are you doing this? And the answer is, well, there's going to be someone who wants to do a crazy punch-only run or something, and it's like, sure, you can do that. Of course, my daughter's waking up. It's midnight. Anyway, I'm going to boil this down and maybe get onto some comments if there are any that I didn't address, at least somewhat here. We are talking about personal preference, dancers being good for boots or other movement boosting options. That provides an interesting give and take of sometimes you want the dancer to be able to move to catch up to your cavalry. Sometimes you want the cavalry to move farther after you dance for them. You know, it's a balance there. Enjoy the versatility of choosing who would be your dancer in 3 houses. That seems to be pretty popular as well. Again, combat is actually potentially useful on a dancer, and the other options with magic access and all that type of stuff. 3 houses did dancers in a very interesting way that I don't think would work for most Fire Emblem games, but I also don't think that the way that most Fire Emblem games handle dancers would work for 3 houses. It kind of found that niche of like, hey, if you can make any of your units anything, how do we treat dancers? Well, any of your units can be a dancer, but we don't like having multiple dancers in the player's hands because it incentivizes some toxic patterns, which a lot of people were confused about what those toxic patterns were. They're like, oh yeah, if you just dance for a dancer and dance for a dancer, that's not a benefit. It's like, no, that is quite a benefit, because if you can dance for a dancer infinitely, you can have your dancers be anywhere on the map that is not hard blocked. Anywhere. Not only can you infinite level them, which if you were in a game where dancers have combat abilities, it is just infinite levels in one turn, is scary. You can also have dancers at one corner of the map do these things, dance these units. Oh, other units are in trouble. Dance to the other corner of the map. Dance the units there. It's like, sure, it's not game breaking entirely, but it does effectively remove the movement limit on your dancers. So probably a good idea to not have 2 dancers in the same map, or at the very least not have 2 dancers be able to dance each other. Other other comments. Dancers giving experience to other units, dancing for the same unit multiple times in order for them to get a bigger share of the experience pot. That's a pretty common thing. I believe I mentioned that in some of my text, but it didn't make it into the script. Someone prefers games without a dancer. If dancers exist, players are pressured to use them because they're effectively 7 copy of your best unit. Exacerbates a Pokemon problem? which I was a little bit confused by what they were saying. Where you juggernaut through the game with one powerful unit rather than splitting the resources in a team of 6 or more. Okay. That's fair. I think that that is fair in terms of Fire Emblem is a game that definitely rewards investing into a smaller party of stronger units, and Dancers exacerbate that situation because it encourages you to dance those same units, use those same units multiple times instead of using multiple units. But also, again, coming back to my earlier point when I was mentioning Doom, and I would even mention like Dark Souls with this as well, just because the game gives you options doesn't mean that those options are good. It doesn't necessarily mean the game should give you those options. And I think that with deployment, that is a much more tenuous thing to claim. But if a game is better designed to have to focus your focus, I almost said, to narrow your focus down on a smaller group of highly effective units, then having a refresher unit like a Dancer incentivizes the player to do just that, which is incentivizing and rewarding the player for doing the powerful thing in ways that go beyond just the powerful thing, but in terms of, hey, here's a different play pattern that loops back into the optimal loop. And so guiding players back to more optimal patterns, or not even optimal patterns, but stronger patterns through multiple avenues, I think is a good thing overall, though I understand people's frustrations with it. And I would love to hear what the comments have to say, chewing me up when, like I said, it's almost midnight and I am trying to come up with ways to make these sentences make sense, whilst my daughter, who should be sleeping, is waking up and pounding on the walls. I would love to see what the comments have to say about that, because maybe in text I can be more effective. I am a more effective writer than I am a speaker. My most clear phraseology has come when I have written it down and not when I have spoken it off the top of my head. And I think with that, I'm going to end the video because my daughter is screaming at midnight, and she's going to wake my wife and everyone else. That's the only 2 people in the house. My daughter's screaming at midnight, and that's not good, so I'm going to leave it here. Thank you to everyone for watching. Thank you so much to the channel members, whom I will read out your names in just a moment as soon as I pull up this page. I was not prepared for this. Here we are. Yes. Thank you so much to the Royal Laguz Guard, the Forgotten L, and the rest of the Laguz Guard, C2 Peekily, Enigmatic Mr. L, Mad Moke, Bro Duderman, Kumi, Miss Mesmerism, Lakag, Rella6, and Salmelon. Thank you so much for directly supporting the channel and all that I do. I am hopeful that I can keep making content, and with your encouragement, this does definitely help encourage me to make said content. But, as always, this has been Mithril Zenith, signing out. Have a good night, everyone.